Ethan Ralston stood in the biting winds of Io's sulphurous wasteland, his fists clenched tight around a rusted spade. The pit before him yawned wide and deep, carved by the forced labor of thousands of prisoners. He was one among many. A faded, orange jumpsuit stretched across his broad shoulders, his beard thick with dust and grime. No one spoke as the guards marched along the perimeter, their plasma rifles glinting under the colony's flickering floodlights. This was Ethan's existence. Dig, endure the cold, and survive another day under the Empire's heel. Io was no ordinary prison. The moon's harsh environment, with its volcanic landscape and toxic atmosphere, was the ideal deterrent to escape. Even if someone got past the fences and the drone patrols, they'd never last a minute out in the open. The Galactic Empire made sure its convicts knew that their only fate was to toil until they broke, or died. But Ethan wasn't broken. Not yet. Not ever. As he shoveled more slag into the pit, he thought back to the life he'd lost. Once he'd been an engineer on an independent asteroid colony. He'd worked hard, patched hull breaches, fixed malfunctioning drones, and kept his people alive in the cold void of space. Then the Empire arrived. They'd demanded tribute, resources, and total submission. Ethan had refused, and for that, defiance for standing up to their demands, they'd labeled him a saboteur. The tribunal was a farce, the evidence fabricated, but it didn't matter. Ethan was sentenced to Io's work camps, a punishment that was as much about making an example of him as it was about breaking his spirit. It nearly worked. For the first year, Ethan was just another body in the line, just another pair of hands, pushing rocks into the endless pit. But time had not dulled his hatred. It had only sharpened it. He watched the guards. He studied the patrol drones. He learned the shift rotations, the weak points in the fences, and the old supply tunnels that ran beneath the surface. Every blow of the spade, every pull of the shovel was a reminder that he was not dead yet, and while he lived, he could fight. Then came the incident. The guards had always been cruel, but one day, a new overseer decided to make an example of another prisoner, a wiry, defiant man who had refused to hand over a small ration of water. The overseer dragged the man into the open and beat him with an electrified baton. Ethan felt his blood boil. The guards kept their distance from the inmates, relying on fear and technology to maintain control. But this was different. The overseer crossed a line Ethan could not ignore. When the overseer raised the baton for another blow, Ethan acted. He dropped the spade, surged forward, and caught the man's wrist in a grip so fierce it made the baton clatter to the ground. The overseer's eyes widened as Ethan twisted his arm and sent him sprawling into the dirt. It wasn't a calculated move. It was raw instinct. Years of bottled fury exploded in an instant. The other prisoners froze. The guards on the perimeter leveled their rifles. Ethan stood over the overseer, his chest heaving, his hands bloodied from gripping the jagged rocks around the pit. "Don't," Ethan growled. His voice was low, but it carried. The overseer scrambled backward, clutching his arm. The guards hesitated. It was the first time anyone had struck back. For a moment, Ethan wondered if they'd shoot him on the spot. Instead, they grabbed the overseer and dragged him away. The other prisoners exchanged glances, their eyes alight with something Ethan hadn't seen before. Hope. From that day on, the guards never got too close. Ethan became a symbol, an unbroken man among the broken. The prisoners began to whisper his name. It wasn't a rebellion, not yet, but it was a spark, and sparks had a way of growing. Ethan didn't fight again. Right away. He knew that defiance alone wouldn't bring down the Empire. He needed more than fists. He needed a plan. So he waited. He watched. and when the experimental weapon test destabilized the power grid, plunging Io into darkness, Ethan didn't hesitate. The blackout was his chance. In the chaos, he led a small group through the forgotten supply tunnels, bypassing the electric fences and automated turrets. It wasn't just a break for freedom, it was a break for something bigger. As they stepped out into Io's sulphurous night, Ethan turned back toward the prison camp, his fists clenched. The Empire would pay. He would make sure of it. With nothing but his hands and his indomitable will, Ethan Ralston would carve out a path to freedom. The asteroid was a bleak, hollowed-out rock floating in a forgotten corner of the Kuiper Belt. Ethan and the ragged handful of escapees had arrived with little more than their prison-issued jumpsuits and a few stolen rations. The asteroid's long-abandoned mining complex, once a bustling hub of mineral extraction, was now a skeletal labyrinth of rusting beams, collapsed tunnels, and silent machinery. For Ethan, it was perfect. As the others scouted the surrounding caverns for supplies, Ethan descended into what had once been the central smelting chamber. The place was cavernous, its walls lined with old conduits and gutted furnaces. The air was cold, and the faint scent of metal lingered. Ethan ran his hands over the pitted surface of a massive smelter, its fire long extinguished. Even in its decay, the room exuded potential. This was where their rebellion would take shape. Over the next few days, the group set to work. There were 7 of them in total, a diverse crew of former miners, technicians, and factory workers. None were fighters. None, that is, except Ethan. His time on Io had forged him into something tougher than steel. While the others scavenged and repaired what they could, Ethan led by example. He pulled down broken pipes, stripped copper from old circuitry, and hammered out makeshift tools with his bare hands. Slowly, the underground forge began to hum to life. The asteroid's forgotten tunnels provided refuge, but they also posed danger. Imperial patrols swept the outer colonies regularly, and any sign of activity would draw attention. They kept their fires small, their repairs quiet, and their movements swift. Ethan set up sentries, improvised alarms triggered by loose wires and rattling metal at every entrance. The others began to trust his leadership. He wasn't just a strong man. He was smart, resourceful, and utterly determined. One evening, while the group huddled in the smelting chamber, Ethan laid out his vision. He explained that they couldn't rely on advanced weaponry or high-tech solutions. The Empire controlled those resources. They would have to rely on what they had, their hands, their wits, and the element of surprise. Out there, Ethan said, gesturing toward the stars visible through a fractured skylight. The Empire's got ships, drones, and armies. We can't fight them head-on. But what we can do is show people that you don't need all that to stand up. We use what's here, what we can make ourselves. And when others see that, when they see that we don't need 1,000 credits worth of gear to fight back, they'll rise up too. It was a bold plan, and not everyone was convinced. Darius, a wiry ex-technician, voiced what many were thinking. We're mechanics and miners, not soldiers. What makes you think we can actually pull this off? Ethan looked at him, his hands still stained from a day of pounding metal into shape. Because we're the ones who know how to build things. The Empire uses machines to keep us down, right? Well, who do you think built those machines? We did. The people. If anyone can tear them down, it's us. And I'm not asking you to believe we can do it overnight. I'm just asking you to believe that it's possible. The room fell silent. They'd all suffered under the Empire's rule, each in their own way. The idea of fighting back, of taking something as simple as a piece of scrap metal and turning it into a weapon, was intoxicating. Slowly, nods spread through the group. One by one, they started to see what Ethan saw. a path forward. As the weeks passed, the underground forge became more than a hiding place. It became a workshop, a training ground, and a rallying point. The crew learned to craft rudimentary weapons, crowbars reforged into razor-sharp blades, shields cobbled together from mining plates, and traps made from salvaged cables and explosive residue. Ethan trained them in hand-to-hand combat, teaching techniques that relied on leverage and precision rather than brute strength. The men and women who had once shuffled through life as prisoners now carried themselves with purpose. But the Empire wasn't blind. A routine supply ship sent to the region noticed the faint heat signatures from the asteroid's smelting chamber. A patrol was dispatched. When Ethan saw the Imperial shuttle land on the asteroid's surface, he knew the test had come. The group moved quickly. They extinguished the forge's fires and concealed their makeshift weapons. Ethan positioned them in the tunnels leading to the chamber, their sharp-edged tools hidden in the shadows. The Imperial patrol, 4 soldiers armed with plasma carbines, entered cautiously. They weren't expecting much more than a stray scavenger or a malfunctioning drone. Ethan watched from a hidden alcove as the soldiers advanced. When they were close enough, he stepped into their path unarmed. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice calm. The soldiers raised their weapons, and Ethan saw their hesitation. They didn't expect a lone, unarmed man to confront them. But before they could react, Ethan sprang into motion. He disarmed the closest soldier with a brutal twist, using the man's own carbine to block a strike from the next. The others charged, but Ethan's crew emerged from the shadows, overwhelming the soldiers with sheer determination and their makeshift weapons. The battle was quick, chaotic, and dirty. When it was over, the crew stood amidst the fallen soldiers, breathing hard, but triumphant. They'd won, not with advanced technology or overwhelming firepower, but with their hands, their wits, and their refusal to bow. The victory wasn't just about survival, it was proof. Proof that they could fight back. Proof that Ethan's vision wasn't a pipe dream. That night, as the group huddled around the dim glow of their repaired forge, Ethan spoke once more. "This is just the start," he said. "The Empire thinks it's invincible because it has all the toys, all the weapons. But we've shown that doesn't matter. People out there, on the colonies, on the stations, on the planets under their boot, they're just waiting for a reason to fight. We'll give them that reason. We'll show them what we did here. And we'll prove that with enough grit and enough courage, the Empire can be brought down." The others nodded. They were no longer just prisoners. News of the asteroid skirmish spread faster than Ethan had anticipated. The surviving guards had fled, leaving a trail of rumors that were quickly picked up by outposts and trade ships. By the time Ethan and his crew set out on their next mission, whispers of the man who needed no weapons had already begun circulating across the outer colonies. These whispers were fuel for Ethan's plan, proof that the galaxy was ready to hear about a new kind of resistance. They started small. Rather than launching full-scale assaults, Ethan led his crew in precise guerrilla-style strikes. Imperial supply depots on remote moons mysteriously emptied. Transports carrying critical materials were delayed, rerouted, or sabotaged. Each mission was a carefully coordinated effort. Identify a weak point, hit it hard, and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. Ethan's crew learned to move like ghosts, relying on stealth and speed rather than brute force. It was during one of these early missions that Ethan's reputation truly began to take shape. On a frigid mining colony known as Tartarus, an Imperial overseer was extorting the local workers for double their rations. The people, exhausted and malnourished, were on the verge of collapse. Ethan and his team infiltrated the colony's central hub in the dead of night, armed only with the tools they could carry, wrenches, pry bars, and lengths of heavy chain. They waited for the overseer's guards to change shifts. When the moment came, Ethan struck first. He took out the patrols silently, using a combination of chokeholds and well-placed strikes. As his crew moved through the colony, they disabled the Overseer's automated defenses, ensuring that no alarms could sound. By dawn, the Overseer was gone, and the stolen rations had been distributed among the workers. The workers didn't just see Ethan as a liberator, they saw him as living proof that the Empire wasn't as all-powerful as it claimed to be. His exploits spread through the black market communication networks, reaching other colonies in record time. Soon, Ethan's name became synonymous with resistance. He was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, a myth in the making. People who had once been too afraid to act began to organize. Underground cells formed on dozens of worlds, each inspired by the idea that if a handful of ex-prisoners armed with nothing but courage and creativity could defy the Empire, so could they. But it wasn't just the colonists who noticed. The Empire began to see Ethan's rebellion as a growing threat. The regional governor of the Outer Territories issued a bounty for his capture, broadcasting it on every channel. It was an astronomical sum, designed not just to attract hunters but to instill fear. "This is what happens to those who resist," the governor's stern voice declared. "You may gain a fleeting moment of freedom, but the Empire always prevails." Ethan responded with an audacious move. While the bounty hunters were combing the asteroid fields and backwater moons, he targeted a critical Imperial outpost on Cinder Prime, a small industrial world. This facility housed experimental drones that the Empire used to monitor and control far-flung colonies. Destroying it would deal a severe blow to their surveillance network and demonstrate just how vulnerable they were. Ethan's team infiltrated the outpost through a maintenance shaft, using tools crafted in their asteroid forge to bypass security. Once inside, they split into pairs, disabling drone control terminals and sabotaging the power generators. The plan was going smoothly until the guards discovered them. In the chaos that followed, Ethan found himself face to face with an Imperial officer who drew a high-tech plasma baton. The officer smirked. "You're the infamous Ethan Ralston, the so-called bare-handed warrior? Let's see how tough you really are." Ethan didn't reply. Instead, he shifted into a fighting stance, his calloused hands curling into fists. The officer lunged, swinging the baton in a wide arc. Ethan sidestepped and drove his shoulder into the man's ribs, knocking him off balance. The officer recovered quickly, fainting high before striking low, the baton's plasma edge crackling against the floor. Ethan dodged again, his movements precise and economical. With each strike, he grew more confident, more aware of his opponent's rhythm. Finally, when the officer lunged once more, Ethan stepped in, caught the baton arm and twisted. The weapon clattered to the ground. Ethan followed up with a powerful elbow to the officer's temple, sending him crumpling to the floor. He didn't gloat or pause. He simply retrieved the baton, snapped it in half with a sharp motion, and continued the mission. By the time the Empire realized what had happened, it was too late. The drone facility was in ruins, the surveillance network disrupted, and the garrison humiliated. Ethan and his crew had escaped again. This victory, like the others, wasn't just about the immediate tactical gain. It was a message to the galaxy. If one man and a small group of rebels could take on the Empire and win, then the Empire's power wasn't absolute. That message ignited countless smaller sparks of rebellion. Colonies that had once been cowed into submission began to rise. Some sabotaged Imperial supply lines. Others spread anti-Imperial propaganda. Each act, no matter how small, contributed to the growing wave of defiance. For Ethan, these sparks were just the beginning. He knew that each mission, each victory, was a step closer to his ultimate goal, a galaxy where no one would have to live under the Empire's tyranny. and as the rebellion grew, so did his legend. People began calling him the Human Forge, a man who used nothing but his own strength and determination to build a revolution. As the chapter ended, Ethan stood on the surface of a remote moon gazing up at the stars. He could feel it. Something was shifting. The galaxy was waking up. The Empire had suffered enough losses. The regional governor's messages grew more frantic. Outposts toppled, supply lines evaporated, and through it all, the same name rang out in hushed conversations and defiant shouts. Ethan Ralston, a man, without an army, without advanced weapons, without fear, had achieved what seasoned rebel leaders had not. It was enough to draw the personal attention of the Emperor. He didn't appear on public broadcasts, didn't make grand threats. Instead, he summoned a single individual to his shadowed throne room on the Imperial capital world. The figure that emerged from the dark corridors was lean, clad in a sleek black combat suit that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her face was obscured by a tactical visor, her movements precise, deliberate. She was the Empire's most dangerous weapon, a hand-picked enforcer known only as Shadowblade. The Emperor's command was simple: end him. Ethan, meanwhile, was in the midst of planning his next strike. He'd heard whispers of an Imperial shipyard orbiting an ocean world. It was a facility where the Empire tested prototype starcraft, heavily guarded and well hidden. Taking it out would cripple the Empire's naval research and send a strong message that even their most secret installations weren't safe. He worked through the details with his team in the underground forge, but something felt off. He couldn't shake the feeling that the Empire was finally taking him seriously. The bounty had increased, the patrols were thicker, and though he had become adept at moving silently, striking fast, and vanishing before the Empire could retaliate, he sensed an invisible weight pressing against him. The shipyard mission began like many others. Ethan and his team approached the facility in a stolen mining shuttle, entering through an underused maintenance port. They split into teams, each targeting a key piece of the shipyard's infrastructure. Ethan himself took the most dangerous role, infiltrating the central control tower to disable the facility's advanced security systems. He moved quickly, silently, slipping through corridors and disarming guards with brutal efficiency. When he reached the control tower's main hub, he planted his crude but effective devices, homemade EMP charges rigged to the station's main grid. The facility's lights dimmed and alarms blared. It was a familiar scenario. Chaos erupting as the Empire scrambled to respond, Ethan's team slipping out before reinforcements arrived. But this time, the reinforcements were waiting for him as Ethan darted through a long, dimly lit corridor toward the extraction point. The air seemed to shift. The sound of the alarms, the hum of the shipyard's machinery. It all felt muffled, distant. His instincts screamed a warning a split second before the first strike. He barely avoided it, twisting to the side as a blade-like energy weapon carved through the air where his head had been. She stepped from the shadows, her visor glowing faintly. The Shadow Blade. Ethan's first impression was her speed. She moved like a blur, her strike so precise that he had to throw himself into a full sprint just to keep from being sliced apart. She said nothing, her silence unnerving. Ethan was used to taunts, orders barked by Imperial soldiers, or even desperate shouts from his opponents. But not her. She simply attacked, relentless and methodical. Ethan fought back the only way he knew how, with his hands. He blocked her blade with metal panels ripped from the walls, slammed her into bulkheads, and used every bit of terrain to keep her off balance. But she adapted faster than anyone he'd ever faced. The fight became a deadly dance through the shipyard's crumbling infrastructure. Sparks flew as her blade sliced through pipes and conduits, while Ethan's fists and feet found openings to drive her back. even if only for moments. For every hit Ethan landed, she delivered 2 more. For every trap he set, she had a counter. He felt himself wearing down. His strikes grew slower, his movements more labored. She was forcing him to rely on pure instinct, pushing him beyond his limits. But he refused to quit. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Eventually, the fight spilled into a docking bay where Ethan's team waited. The sight of him, bloodied and battered, squaring off against the deadly figure, froze them in place. Ethan shouted for them to get to the shuttle and leave without him. They hesitated, but one look at Shadowblade told them that staying would mean death. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Ethan faced her once more. She charged and he feinted left before hurling a cargo crate into her path. It gave him just enough time to leap onto the shuttle's ramp as it began to ascend. The Shadowblade didn't pursue. She simply stood there, staring up at him, the visor concealing any emotion. Ethan didn't know if he'd won or just survived, but he knew she'd be back. Back on the asteroid, Ethan tried to shake the encounter, but it lingered in his mind. He'd faced impossible odds before, taken down mechs and squads of soldiers. Yet this was different. Shadowblade wasn't a nameless trooper or a faceless machine. She was a shadow that moved just beyond his reach, a living embodiment of the Empire's fury. The skirmish had taken its toll and Ethan's team was shaken. For the first time, they began to question if they could truly stand against the Empire. Morale dipped, the forge grew quieter, and even Ethan found himself brooding longer over his plans. He knew what the Empire was doing, trying to wear him down, make him doubt. But he also knew that for every time he got back up, for every hit he endured and every strike he returned, his legend grew. Even Shadowblade, as skilled as she was, had not stopped him, and as long as he stood, others would follow. The rebellion didn't die that day. If anything, it grew more determined. They adapted, grew smarter, learned from the encounter. Ethan's fight with Shadowblade wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his war against the Empire, a chapter that would pit his own. Ethan sat quietly in the darkened cockpit of a stolen shuttle, the glow from the planet ahead casting faint blue light over his face. Calestis Prime, the Imperial capital, lay beneath him, a massive planet-spanning metropolis, protected by orbital defense platforms and enough firepower to destroy fleets. This was the heart of the Empire, the source of its tyranny. It had taken years of planning and sacrifice, but now, finally, the rebellion was ready. They had not reached this point through brute force alone. The battle had always been one of attrition, of eroding the Empire's might bit by bit. Every supply line cut, every factory sabotaged, every outpost freed, had weakened the once mighty regime. And every time Ethan Ralston emerged from the chaos, unarmed but victorious, the galaxy's disenfranchised grew bolder. The people no longer whispered his name, they shouted it, and now they had rallied, millions strong, to challenge the Empire where it was strongest. Ethan's plan for Calestis Prime was as audacious as the man himself. The rebellion didn't have the numbers for a direct assault, nor the firepower to breach the planet's planetary shields. Instead, they relied on cunning and precision. The operation began with a series of decoy strikes on the outer defense platforms, drawing the Imperial fleet away from the planet's surface. It was a dangerous gambit. If even one platform detected the ruse too soon, the entire mission could collapse. The deception worked. As Imperial ships scrambled to reinforce their orbital defenses, Ethan's team slipped through a maintenance corridor hidden deep within Calestis Prime's undercity. The labyrinth of tunnels and conduits stretched for miles, designed long ago for workers who maintained the city's endless machinery. The Empire had largely forgotten about these passageways, relying instead on automated systems and AI drones. But Ethan and his rebels had spent months mapping them, using old schematics and the knowledge of defectors who had once served as Imperial engineers. Ethan moved through the tunnels with purpose, leading his crew of seasoned fighters and technicians. Each step brought them closer to the Imperial Palace, a towering spire that rose above the city, its peak piercing the upper atmosphere. Within that palace were the central command systems that controlled the Empire's fleets, planetary defenses, and intelligence networks. Shutting it down wouldn't just end the battle. It would cripple the Empire permanently. The closer they got, the more intense the resistance became. The Empire, though caught off guard by the ruse, still had vast resources. Patrols roamed the corridors and automated turrets covered key intersections. Ethan's team fought with the tenacity of those who had nothing left to lose. They dismantled security systems, overwhelmed guards with improvised weapons, and turned the Empire's own technology against it. When they finally reached the base of the palace, Ethan faced a new challenge: the shielded central elevator that led to the command nexus. The door, made of reinforced plasteel, was unbreakable, but Ethan had anticipated this. One of his engineers produced a compact device built from salvaged components. As the others provided cover, the engineer attached it to the elevator's control panel. Sparks flew as the device overloaded the system, forcing the doors open. "Move fast," Ethan ordered. He and his team piled into the elevator. As it ascended, the walls around them vibrated with distant explosions. The rebellion's fleet, such as it was, had joined the fray, engaging the remaining orbital platforms and keeping the Empire's forces distracted. But it was a desperate fight, and Ethan knew they had only minutes to finish the job. When the elevator doors slid open, they were met with fierce resistance. Imperial guards in full battle armor blocked their path, plasma weapons blazing. Ethan led the charge, ducking under a burst of fire and driving his shoulder into the nearest soldier. His crew followed, scattering the guards through sheer force and speed. They pressed forward, advancing room by room until they reached the command nexus. The nexus was a massive chamber, filled with consoles and holographic displays that projected the Empire's vast territory. In the center stood the planetary shield controls and the main fleet coordination interface. Ethan's team spread out, securing the room and locking down the doors. He approached the central console, his fingers hovering over the controls. This was it. One final move and the Empire's greatest stronghold would fall. Before he could act, the chamber's main doors burst open. Shadowblade stepped through, her visor reflecting the blue glow of the holograms. Behind her, a dozen heavily armed troops fanned out, weapons trained on the rebels. The room went silent. Ethan's team tensed, their makeshift weapons at the ready. But Ethan held up a hand, signaling them to stand down. This was his fight. "Ralston," Shadowblade said, her voice cold and sharp. "It ends here." Ethan turned to face her. It always does. The room seemed to shrink around them as the two combatants squared off. Shadowblade's energy blades ignited with a hiss, the faint blue light casting eerie shadows. Ethan's fists clenched. He'd faced her once before and barely survived. But now, here at the heart of the Empire, there was no room for hesitation. She moved first, a blur of motion. Ethan met her strikes with a mix of deflections and counterattacks, using the environment to his advantage. He vaulted over consoles, dodged between pillars, and turned every surface into a weapon. Shadowblade's blades carved through the air, with surgical precision, but Ethan's raw strength and instinct kept him in the fight. His punches dented armor, and his throws sent shockwaves through the room. The battle raged on, each combatant pushing the other to their limits. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles screaming in protest. But as Shadowblade leapt for a final strike, he saw an opening. He stepped into her attack, grappling her arm and slamming her into the console with a deafening crash. Sparks erupted as the interface shattered under the impact. The room fell silent again. Shadowblade lay motionless, her visor cracked, her weapons extinguished. Ethan stood over her, battered but unbroken. He turned to his team, who stared in stunned silence. "Finish it," he said. They moved quickly, dismantling the remaining defenses and deactivating the planetary shield. Outside, the rebellion's fleet, such as it was, poured through the atmosphere, supporting the rising tide of resistance fighters who had taken to the streets. The Empire's grip on Celestis Prime crumbled. By the time the sun rose over the shattered city, the Imperial banners had fallen, and the capital was in rebel hands. Ethan Ralston, the man who needed no weapons, had brought the Empire to its knees, but he knew the fight wasn't over yet. The Empire had fallen. Ethan Ralston stood atop a ridge of shattered stone on a desolate moon, gazing out at what was once the last Imperial bastion. The fortress, a sprawling compound of reinforced alloy and pulsating energy grids, was no more than a smoldering ruin. Smoke curled into the thin, cold air, and the only sounds were the faint crackle of fires and the distant hum of rebel transports moving supplies. It had taken everything to reach this point. Years of fighting, countless missions, a lifetime's worth of wounds. But now, as the remnants of the Empire lay scattered and broken, Ethan felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a victory, it was an ending he had to make permanent. The rebellion had grown into a coalition. The free colonies, once little more than fractured, isolated settlements, had unified under a shared banner. Ethan, however, refused to lead it. He didn't want power he never had. His role had always been to break the Empire's grip, to shatter the chains so that others could rebuild. He left the governance to those who had spent years organizing, negotiating, and planning for what came next. But he wasn't finished. Ethan knew that the real challenge wasn't just defeating the Empire, it was ensuring it never rose again. History had shown time and again that empires were like weeds. If even the smallest root remained, it could grow back. And so, Ethan took it upon himself to ensure that no root would be left behind. He set out across the galaxy, moving from one fallen Imperial site to the next. With his bare hands and the determination that had made him a legend, he dismantled what remained. He tore down empty fortresses, crushed abandoned war factories, and decommissioned the Empire's automated facilities. He didn't rely on advanced demolition charges or state-of-the-art equipment. Ethan had always believed in the power of people, of what they could do with their own strength, their own hands, and this final chapter of his mission was no different. His name spread further, but not in the way it once had. Now it was spoken in quiet admiration and gratitude. The human forge had become the human who forged a future without tyranny. He inspired others to do the same. Where Ethan led, entire communities joined in. Colonists took up tools, not weapons, and dismantled the infrastructure that had kept them oppressed. They buried the Empire's legacy under piles of rubble and miles of earth. But it wasn't just about destruction. Ethan ensured that as they buried the past, they built something new. He encouraged the colonies to work together, to share resources, and to look after one another. By the time he had completed his journey, the galaxy was unrecognizable. What was once a patchwork of downtrodden planets was now a network of free worlds, cooperating to rebuild and thrive. One day, Ethan found himself back on the moon, where it had all ended. The ruins of the last Imperial Command Center stood before him, now overgrown with alien moss and strange crystalline formations. He knelt and placed his calloused hands on the cold ground, reflecting on the journey that had brought him there. He had done what he set out to do. The Empire was gone, Its war machines were buried, its fortresses reduced to dust, its influence erased. The galaxy would still face challenges, political disputes, economic hardships, cultural differences, but these were problems to be solved by free people, not dictated by an oppressive regime. Ethan Ralston, the man who had annihilated the Galactic Empire with nothing but his hands and his unyielding will, rose to his feet. He looked up at the stars, the same stars he had stared at from a prison on Io all those years ago. They seemed brighter now,